Good morning, everyone. My name is Cindy Bertram, and I'm providing tech support this morning for the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy for the Protocol 9 webinar. Before the webinar begins, I would like to go over just a few housekeeping items. This morning, we have over 150 people that are registered to participate in the webinar. Due to numbers and the opportunities for background noise, we will be keeping all microphones for participants muted. And what we would encourage you to do during the presentation will be by PowerPoint. It'll be approximately 30 minutes. At the end of the presentation, we do have 30 minutes for a Q&A session. So we encourage you during the session, as you have questions, to use the question box that's on the right-hand side of your panel there. You can put the questions in. When we get to the Q&A session, we will be answering them in the order in which they have come. So without any further ado, I would like to turn the microphone over to Natalia to start the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending our webinar. Land remediation section of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy recently introduced and implemented Stage 13 amendments that came into force on February 1st, 2021. The scope included significant changes and updates to a series of protocols, and today's webinar will focus on Protocol 9, which is called Establishing Local Background Concentrations in Groundwater. The protocol describes options for establishing a local background concentration in groundwater for use in the investigation and remediation of a contaminated site where naturally occurring substance concentrations exceed the generic numerical water standards in the contaminated sites regulation. Next slide, please. My name is Natalia Kukleva, and I'm Manager of Risk Assessment and Remediation with Land Remediation Section of the Ministry, and a Manager Sponsor for this protocol. And before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Lekwungen-speaking peoples on whose traditional territory the Office of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, where I work, stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and WSÁNEĆ people whose historical relationship with this land continues today. Now I want to introduce our protocol leads, Steve Dankve and Lavinia Zanini, Senior Contaminated Site Officers, who will provide you with an overview of the protocol, including the recent amendment. Steve, it's over to you now.
Thanks, Natalia. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for participating in this webinar today. My name is Steve Dankve, and I work as a Senior Contaminated Sites Officer in the Land Remediation Section office in Surrey, and I'm a professional hydrogeologist by training. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Semiahmoo, Katzie, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kikite, and Tsawwassen First Nations.
Good morning. I'm Lavinia Zanini, as the Senior Contaminated Sites Officer with the Land Remediation Section. I would like to acknowledge with respect that I'm presenting on the traditional and unceded territories of the Kikite First Nation and all Coast Salish peoples where I gratefully live, work, and raise my kids. Both Steve and I will be presenting today, and Steve will begin the presentation.
Next slide, please. So let's start with the protocol and purpose. Protocol version 1 was first introduced in 2004, and version 2 came into force on February 1st, 2021. The intent of the protocol hasn't changed from version 1 to version 2. Functionally, it provides procedure and methodology to establish local background concentrations in groundwater at a site. Practitioners may use this protocol in investigation and remediation of a contaminated site where naturally occurring substance concentrations exceed the generic numerical water standards of the CSR. This protocol is also used in the establishment of risk-based standards for remediation. Now, it's important to note that the regulatory authority for establishing this protocol stems from the Environmental Management Act, Section 64(1), which authorizes a director to establish a protocol, and Section 64(2), which specifically authorizes procedures for establishing a local background concentration at a site, class, or geographical area, which enables regional background concentrations to be established. These regional values are still considered to be local background concentrations as defined in the Environmental Management Act. Additionally, subsection 11.3 of the Contaminated Sites Regulation specifically states that a site is not a contaminated site if substances are present below a local background concentration. And we have a poll question next. Put that up, Cindy. So the question is, have you ever submitted an application for a Protocol 9 approval to the ministry? Please select one answer, yes or no.
Getting close. Okay, I'll close the poll now and we'll share the results.
Okay, it looks like 1/3 of you have completed one of these Protocol 9 applications and 2/3 of you haven't. So hopefully this presentation will encourage you to submit such an application. Okay, next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, version 1 of the protocol was created in 2004. The Stage 11 amendments brought a lot of attention to this protocol because of the lowering of some of the existing groundwater standards and introduction of various new groundwater standards. This created a situation where many more sites would become contaminated sites based on background conditions. To address this overcapturing of sites, the ministry developed internal policy and posted Technical Bulletin 3 in August 2019. This bulletin included regional background concentrations for 5 inorganic compounds, which were determined to have the biggest impact in 3 regions: the Lower Mainland, Southern Vancouver Island, and Thompson Okanagan. This interim policy was created to be a temporary measure, and its contents was rolled to the updated Protocol 9 version 2, which is the new version of the protocol. Updated protocol reflects the current methodology supported by the ministry, and this methodology incorporates updates to developments in methodology since this protocol was introduced in 2004. Next slide, please. So what are the differences between version 1 and version 2? Now, unlike the original protocol, the updated protocol provides several options for use on your sites. The updated protocol, option 1, provides for the use of regional background concentrations in groundwater established by the ministry. Option 2A allows the use of site-specific data to establish a local background concentration, similar to option 1, version 1. And option 2B allows the use of ministry's newly developed database to supplement on-site data. Another change was the addition of a more comprehensive guidance on how to approach an estimation of local background concentrations in groundwater. Next slide, please. So here are some additional significant changes between the 2 versions. 22 additional regional background groundwater parameters were incorporated, in addition to the 5 that were already contained in Technical Bulletin 3. The interim policy, Technical Bulletin 3, was a temporary measure and has been retired with the effective date of the updated protocol. The next bullet speaks to an improvement in the methodology, which had been evolving over the years and was not reflected in the original protocol. This methodology has now been incorporated into the revised protocol. This includes comprehensive representative background monitoring, well selection, and siting criteria. The revised protocol reflects modern science and is anticipated that stakeholders may find it more helpful in establishing background groundwater concentrations at a site. The revised protocol also provides access to the ministry database. This database is new and provides publicly accessible data for 130 sites across 3 regions to supplement existing site-specific data. This was the data that we used to establish the regional concentrations. And finally, the current protocol does not allow establishment of background concentrations for non-point human-made sources. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about option 1, which allows the use of established regional concentrations for 3 regions and how to use it. The regional concentrations can be viewed in Table 1 of Protocol 9 or from the IMAP BC GIS website. I'm going to show a couple of slides which are screenshots of the IMAP BC GIS mapping layer to see what the map layer looks like and what the data looks like. Now there are instructions on how to navigate to this IMAP layer and access the data on the background groundwater database webpage located on the ministry's website. Next slide, please. So how do you use option 1? Well, pretty simple, really. Practitioners can reference Table 1 of Protocol 9 and directly compare site-specific results to regional values in this table. The site must be located within a regional boundary. Option 1 does not require approval from the ministry for purposes of establishing background concentrations in groundwater. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot of the IMAC BC website layer showing the regional background groundwater concentration areas. On the map, you can see the region of interest is highlighted by clicking on it using the identify function, and the data for this region is shown in the left pane. The data includes the region, subregion, and the regional background concentrations. Now, the useful thing about this layer is that you can zoom into any part of the region to see if your site is within the region, or see, as you'll see on the next slide, if there is an established background site closer to your site of interest that you can leverage in terms of data. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a screenshot of the Lower Mainland region, and the green squares represent the actual sites where we have background groundwater data. Now, hopefully you can see these little green squares. They're a little small. But this specific site ID is 6371, and using the identify function, when you click on a green square, the site data is presented on the left pane, and a red indicator highlights the site location on the map. There's a general site identification information, the region, which in this case is the Lower Mainland region, the subregion, which is subregion 1, and the screened unit, which I think is useful information to have when calculating a local background concentration for a site. I'm going to turn it over to Lavinia to talk about option 2. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Steve. Under this option, the local background concentration of a substance in groundwater is calculated using one of the following approaches. Option 2A, background concentrations in groundwater can be established through the collection of site-specific concentration data from representative background monitoring wells located on or adjacent to the site of interest. This is similar to what was previously done in version 1 of Protocol 9 to establish a local background concentration. Option 2B, which is new in the updated version of Protocol 9, local background concentrations in groundwater can be established on the basis of site-specific concentration data collected from the background monitoring wells on your site, and can also be supplemented by concentration data from the ministry's database on background concentrations in groundwater. Concentration data from the database that you would use to supplement site-specific information must be collected within 500 meters of the site of interest and demonstrated to be within the same groundwater flow system and the same hydrogeological unit. The use of option 2A and 2B requires a submission to the director for approval. Next slide, please. The database on background concentration in groundwater, which one would use for option 2B, can be accessed on our background database webpage using this web link displayed on this slide at the top, as you can see. As Steve mentioned, the database contains naturally occurring concentrations of 27 inorganic substances at individual site locations across the province. When you navigate to this web page, you can click on a link that will lead you to this spreadsheet on the left of the slide. This spreadsheet can then further link you to specific site IDs, which you may have determined to be within 500 meters of your site, perhaps using IMAP, like Steve just showed you. An example of site ID 17105 is on the right of the slide. Concentrations determined on specific sampling dates in individual wells can be seen listed in this second spreadsheet. This spreadsheet also contains the following information: the mapped unit, the geological unit in which the monitoring well screen is installed, and the screen interval depth. Next slide, please. Both options 2A and 2B require a rigorous approach to background well siting and selection. The methodology for siting and sampling representative groundwater monitoring wells can be found in section 4.2.3 of the protocol. Of course, a minimum level of site characterization is required to pursue a local background concentration in groundwater at a site. Site characterization guidance that was in the original Protocol 9 has been retained in the updated protocol. A background groundwater investigation must use information gathered from a preliminary site investigation or a detailed site investigation as supporting evidence for siting representative background monitoring wells. Contaminants of concern associated with the areas of environmental concern must be delineated to an extent that ensures that representative background wells are located outside the influence of site contamination. This should involve developing a conceptual site model to demonstrate a good knowledge of groundwater flow at the site. Effort should be made to ensure that the appropriate and adequate groundwater sampling data is collected from representative background wells. Ensure that you collect sufficient data to rule out secondary contamination that may result from changing geochemical conditions from the primary contaminant release. Finally, the background concentration must be calculated as prescribed in section 4.2.4 of the protocol. I will discuss this more later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. Section 4.2.3 of the protocol also provides instruction for appropriate monitoring well siting in order to establish a site-specific background concentration in groundwater. Generally, background monitoring wells should be located up gradient or cross gradient of areas of environmental concern at a site. This is no different from the original version 1 of Protocol 9. However, the updated version introduces some limitations on background monitoring well siting so that reliable representative data can be collected. These limitations are as follows. The background wells must not be located within the footprint of a former excavation or backfill area. They must not be screened in fill material of questionable quality, for example, wood waste, bricks, asbestos. And they must not be influenced by secondary contaminant release processes, such as changes in redox conditions. An example would be the oxygen reducing conditions from a petroleum hydrocarbon plume may release certain metals, such as arsenic. And background wells must not be impacted by anthropogenic sources of contamination, specifically wells with detectable organic substances, such as petroleum hydrocarbons and volatile organic compounds. Next slide, please. Effort should be made to ensure that appropriate groundwater sampling data is collected from representative background wells to provide a comprehensive estimation of local background conditions. The number of background wells and sampling events required to characterize background conditions at a site will vary depending on the complexity of hydrogeology and the site conditions. However, section 4.2.4 does set out minimum data requirements necessary to determine a local background concentration. This is not new, as this minimum level of data necessary to calculate a background groundwater concentration was in the original protocol. The minimum data requirements include collection of samples from a minimum of 3 representative background monitoring wells, develop each monitoring well to minimize suspended sediments in the collected groundwater samples, and a minimum of 2 sampling events are required, one during the wet and one during the dry seasons to help capture seasonal variability at the site. And I think a poll question is coming next. Ooh, yes, it is. So we're asking you to estimate how often background substances in groundwater are a concern at your site. If you select one, that would be great. We want to have a better idea of these concerns, if this is a concern at your site, because ever since Technical Bulletin 3 has come out, we've had less applications for a director's determination of background concentration.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll. We're slow on the voting, but
Oh,
I think it may be that people may not be aware.
Oh, wow. Not very many say 0. So actually, that's great to know that maybe Protocol 9 can help you now that it seems like it's quite a bit of a concern. Thank you. And on to the next slide. Perhaps we can advance one more slide. Oh, perfect. Thank you. So where the data fall within a single statistical population, the representative local background concentration in groundwater for a substance is the 95th percentile concentration of the data set. The calculation must be conducted in 2 steps. Step 1 involves calculating the 95th percentile concentration of the data collected from individual background monitoring well, from each individual well. And step 2 involves calculating the 95th percentile of the values calculated for the combined background monitoring wells. This has often been a confusing calculation, and we do get a lot of questions about it. So I want you to think of it as calculating the 95th percentile of the concentration data of the individual wells first. So you do that first, using the seasonal data. And then taking those individual 95th percentiles to combine them and calculate another 95th percentile to get the final background concentration. Also note that if there are less than 3 sampling dates for individual wells, you must use the maximum concentration observed. And also do not include outliers when calculating the background concentration. So this sums up option 2 of Protocol 9, and I will now pass the presenter's baton to Steve to provide you with some more information. Thank you.
Next slide, please. There it is. Okay. Okay, to finish, I'm going to talk about our stakeholder comments that we received. The draft protocol was posted for comments on our website 45 days, and we received approximately 50 comments. Thank you to those of you who gave feedback to us. We've carefully considered all the comments we've received. Now, the main comment themes are related to the technical aspects of option 2, more specifically to the methodology for establishing local background conditions. There were several comments related to how areas of environmental concern and contaminants of concern affect representative groundwater monitoring well placement. In addition, there were comments related to how contaminants of concern can affect the natural background quality and the potential for secondary chemical processes to dissolve inorganic substances into the groundwater and result in elevated concentrations. This can have the result of disqualifying wells from being used in the local background estimation. Similarly, there were comments about the degree of contaminant delineation required for a background concentration approval related to a detailed site investigation, relative to a detailed site investigation. The director can use discretion should an application provide justification for reasonable departure from the requirements. All the comments were considered, and a comments report will be posted on our website shortly. The responses provide further rationale and clarification. And I want to thank you for your comments. Some of them resulted in wording changes or edits that improve the overall document. Next slide, please. I think that's the end of the presentation, so we're ready to take questions.
And we do have some questions here. The first one is, how are outliners, excuse me just a sec, the box was jumping on us here. What if only a portion of a site falls within the regional boundary?
Good question.
That must be a large site. It does. It's
Yeah.
funny that would happen. We haven't had that happen before, so I think with those site-specific questions, you would just maybe make a question into ask. You could. I don't know. Actually send a contact us question to see if. Because it depends on the size of the site and the differences in the flow system, et cetera. So I would actually ask that specific question at our Contact Us webpage. Steve, would you have any other?
Yeah, I think we need to look at the site-specific conditions, and does the stratigraphy and hydrogeology remain consistent across the site? So yeah, if you want a definitive answer, I'd say make an inquiry through our inquiry management system.
Okay, our next question, just to clarify, do the green squares on the IMAP each represent a site where a Protocol 9 approval has been obtained?
Not necessarily. Some of those sites were from DSI information that may or may not have had a background determination for the site. So the data sources for those green squares were buried.
Okay, and a question about clarification here. In Table 1, is there a units error in the hardness showing for the Thompson-Okanagan region? What it was showing was 3 million milligrams per liter. Should that be
Yep.
3,000
No,
milligrams per liter?
it's 3 million.
It is 3 million, okay.
Yes, very, very hard water there.
Okay, our next question comes from Marion. If a site is split by a regional boundary with a portion of it within the region and a portion outside, can option 1 be used for the full site, or would you have to use option 2 for the portion outside the regional boundary?
Yeah, that's a similar question to the first one. So we're gonna stick with the same answer, which is it's really going to depend on the site-specific conditions. So I think you need to look at that closely and make an inquiry through the Inquiry Management System.
Okay, our next question is a long one. With the changes to Protocol 9 and Protocol 6, the ministry has significantly increased the number of cases where practitioners need to get responses from the ministry in order to complete investigation or remediation, and taking many responsibilities from CSAP. In the last 3 to 4 years, the length of time necessary to get these approvals has increased significantly, often now exceeding a year to get a response. Has the ministry increased staffing or resourcing to address all these new expected requests and pre-approvals?
Natalia, I think you better take this one.
Yeah, I think, yeah, so probably because this webinar is focused on Protocol 9, I suggest that probably we're gonna try to respond to questions related to this protocol. And so for this one, I think that the new version will help to streamline application. And we actually kind of made a huge effort to provide more data to practitioners to be able just to complete their applications with actually less effort. And now probably I can turn it over to our Executive Director, Danielle Gerbovats, and she may address this question as well.
Hi, Natalia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, great. Hi. Yeah, Danielle Gerbovats here. I just wanted to jump in. Yes, with the changes to Protocol 9 and Protocol 6, there may be shifts in which sites are captured. We'll track over the next number of months whether that truly results in a net increase to the applications received. Just a comment on the turnaround times. The ministry collects metrics around intake of applications and how long it takes for applications to be turned around, let's per se, and there's lots of factors: complexity of the site, quality of the application, the number of rounds of comments that go back between the ministry reviewers and the applicant. And our turnaround times have actually not changed substantially within the last 5 years. They've been very, very consistent. So for any applications that was just mentioned in the question about, potentially over a year, I would anticipate that was either an extremely complex application, perhaps a multi-stage application. So I just wanted to make sure that it was clear on the call that the turnaround times have not changed. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Danielle. Our next question, are these webinars being recorded and will they be provided at a later time?
As far as I know, they are. Yes, and they will be
Yes.
provided.
Yes, they are recorded, and yeah.
Yeah, and will be posted to the ministry website in the near future.
That's
Our
right.
next question is from Jeff. Please confirm that option 2B requires a site to be situated within 500 meters of an environmental background site. If so, what are the odds that this option will actually be useful?
Vinny, I think you maybe should answer that one.
Oh, okay. We think that the 500 meters is really reasonable given the complexity of the geology and the hydrogeology that we can find in BC. There might be situations where there's a really sufficient rationale brought forward to take a well that might be a little bit further than the 500 meters, or I'm sorry, take the data from the database that might be a bit further from 500 meters, but that would require an application sent into the ministry to see if that could be accepted.
Yeah, and I will add that we have had many inquiries around using data from other sites. So I think this will there's some utility in leveraging the data that we have in our database, and we anticipate people will use it.
Okay, and our next question. What about sites up north with so little data, like Prince George, where data may not be within 500 meters of the site, and the closest could be as far as 4 kilometers?
You still have the option of developing 2A, developing a site, the local site-specific background. That's always been an option, and that's unfortunately, if there's no data there, it's hard to find a reliable background concentration with little data. So you have to will have to at this point determine a local background concentration at your site using siting wells at your site. In the future, as we get more and more information, hopefully we can get regional background concentrations for that area.
Okay, and our next question. Is a calculation of the 95th percentile from an individual well with 2 data points, wet and dry season, actually statistically valid?
No, not really. So you have to take the maximum when you do that.
Okay, our next question. How are outliers defined and WRT background groundwater concentrations?
Well, with respect to
okay, thank you.
Right.
I was like WRT. Okay, yes, with respect to well, it depends. We don't have a formal definition, Steve. I don't know if you know if we have one, but it's based on looking at your data, and if one of them seems really out of place, perhaps there was an error in sampling, and you should not apply it to developing the background concentration. I don't know if you have any more to add to that.
Yeah, if it should raise a red flag, if you've got a particular value that's completely out of line with the rest of your data set. If you have enough data, you can use statistical methods, which will identify any outliers, and we would encourage you to do that. I know we did it when we were developing the regional values. We had a lot of data, but if you have an individual site, that may be the appropriate way to go.
Okay, our next question comes from Paul. How should field duplicate and lab replicate samples be incorporated into calculations?
Generally, you should use the highest value for the duplicates. That's all I can say. That's the only way we've used them in the past, is you take the higher concentration. And
yeah,
if they are
conservative approach.
Oh, it's not really conservative for background, but we usually use it. We do that for defining contamination at the site, right? But if the duplicate is significantly different from the original sample, then you have an issue, a QA/QC issue. They should be within a certain percentage, of each other. That means you have to resample your well.
Okay, our next question. For option 1, are there any plans to expand the areas covered by the regional background estimates, that being the Kootenays in northern BC? This is a significant hindrance for sites outside of Vancouver, Victoria, or the Okanagan.
Yes, we realize that, and the intention is to expand or adjust the regional boundaries for the existing regions, and hopefully add new ones once we get enough data. So it's going to be an ongoing process that we will return to from time to time, depending on the amount of data that we get. The more background determinations that we accumulate in the database, the more likely it is that we could be able to develop regional background concentrations for those areas that we don't have available for now.
Okay. The next question, what is the IMAP layer called? Still the same as the previous?
Yeah, the layer itself is, I believe it's called background concentrations when you're in the waste tab on the provincial map layers. The specifics of how to navigate to the map layer is on the website on our regional background concentrations webpage. So just refer to that and you'll be able to easily navigate to it. Pretty simple.
Okay, another question with regards to regions. Is there plans to add other regions to Protocol 9 within the next 1 to 2 years?
Potentially. We don't have a,
Yeah,
it's not, we don't have anything right planned at this moment, but this is going to depend, you know, at the end of the 2-year, once this protocol has been out there for 2 years, we'll revisit it and see whether we have enough data to potentially add another region.
Okay, and another question from Jeff. Is a Protocol 6 pre-approval required to not delineate the extent of a contaminant plume if contaminants are suspected to be background ahead of a Protocol 9 application?
I don't think so. If you determine that you have background, elevated background concentrations, and you establish a background value for your site, you don't have to delineate it. So you wouldn't need a P6 application.
Okay, we are getting a lot of questions with regards to regions. Are there plans to develop background concentrations for the Kootenays in northern BC?
Yeah, we just answered that one, I think.
Yeah, okay.
You know, the problem with that is there's less contaminated sites in those regions. So we don't really get a lot of, as many as we applications in to get data from as we do in the lower mainland, right?
Yeah. And I would add that we don't probably have any certain time frames to communicate about introducing another set of data for those additional regions. But what we do, obviously, as a ministry, we just looking and collecting all those data. And once we're going to have data enough just to justify that additional, like whatever, development of those regional concentrations, for sure, yeah, we will try to do it. Yeah, but it's sort of, yeah, the work in progress for this at this point.
Okay, our next question from Mary. How often is the background database updated in IMAP?
Well, it's pretty much brand new, so I can't say right at this point how often we're going to update the data. We'll update it when it's appropriate to, and we'll let you know.
Okay, our next question is from Guy. Can you give an example of applying the 95th percentile calculations, as I find it a little confusing. For example, say we have 3 on-site background wells with seasonal data, summer and winter, and 1 nearby environmental database well.
Well, I tried to explain it before. I know it's not easy to understand, but you would take the wells, the individual wells, whether one's, you know, within 500 meters or whether one's on site, and you would take that seasonal data. So you have a summer and a winter, summer and winter concentrations over maybe, let's say, because many of these sites might not just have 2 sampling events, they might have several because they've been monitoring for several years. So you would take the data from that one individual well, let's say, and you would calculate that 95th percentile. So you have that number, and then you take the next well over, and you that individual well, you calculate the 95th of the percentile of the seasonal data for that one. So once you've done that for every single well, then you take those individual 95th percentiles and you calculate yet another 95th percentile. So a 95th on a 95th. That's how it's, and then you come up with the final concentration, background concentration. I don't know how to explain it any better, to be honest. I know it has created a bit of confusion, but we had advice from a statistician that this was the best way to calculate it.
Okay. Is the ministry planning to add chloride or any other additional substances to Table 1 during future revisions?
Not at this time. We don't have any plans to add additional parameters.
Okay.
Thanks,
Will
Steve.
submission...
Cindy, I just wanted to make a comment just with all of the theme of questions about potential future changes to the protocol. The protocol version, the current version 2 that's posted is the version that we will work with for the foreseeable future, and any plans we have at looking at the scope of potential future changes would be communicated through intentions when, as we have a number of protocols that the program rolls out. So I just want to make sure to temper expectations. Steve probably gave a good time frame of a number of years before we start to look at future revisions. Thanks.
Good. Okay. Will submissions made before February 1st still be within the previous Protocol 9?
I believe yes.
That's right.
Okay. Our next question, will you have a site in subregion 2 with more stringent standards for a perimeter and a subregion 1 boundary is within 500 meters from the property? Are you able to use the location of the other subregion and its data to support approval to apply the other subregional data?
Wow.
Not sure if I understand that question.
I think I'm going to paraphrase. It's using, like, I think it's the Lower Mainland that has the subregions, right, Steve?
Right,
So
right.
it's using the data from like that region within 500 meters, one subregion to another subregion.
Oh, I see.
I
Right.
don't think that's acceptable. You can talk about that, Steve, if.
Yeah, the reason we have 2 subregions in the Lower Mainland is because of the superficial geology is different. So you shouldn't be mixing one subregion's values with another.
It's not the same geological system.
Not the same geological system. So the hydrogeology and basically the background water chemistry will be different from the 2 regions. So
Okay, next
wouldn't
question.
be allowed.
Can Protocol 9 be used for bedrock?
No.
Anthropogenic impact
Well,
does not.
you can use it. Sorry. So in terms of the regional values, you can't use them for bedrock, but you can develop a site-specific option 2. You can use option 2 for bedrock.
Okay. Our next question. Anthropogenic impact does not necessarily result in subsurface changes that would impact background concentrations of metal. What is the rationale to absolutely restrict background monitoring wells to wells that have been impacted by anthropogenic sources?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I will. Anthropogenic impact does not necessarily result in subsurface changes that would impact background concentrations of metals. What is the rationale to absolutely restrict background monitoring wells to wells that have not been impacted by anthropogenic sources?
Okay. Do you want to do that, Steve? Do you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, it could be rationale to support an anthropogenic input or a source on a site that may not have any impact of an inorganic parameter. You actually need to look at what the source is and what the geochemistry is and how there may be an interaction between that anthropogenic input and the natural groundwater chemistry. And that's really what we're asking in this protocol and what we would like to see in this protocol. And in our experience, I mean, there are, especially with hydrocarbons, when there is a hydrocarbon source on a site, it can influence the redox reactions and change concentrations of the metals in the groundwater. So I wouldn't say that it's an outright restriction, but they should be avoided.
Mhm.
And if you want to make provide a rationale as to why the particular anthropogenic source isn't adversely affecting the groundwater quality, then you could do that.
Yeah, I would add that basically these protocols explicitly refers to naturally occurring substances in groundwater, and we trying, to clearly distinguish that they are not influenced by any anthropogenic sources or anthropogenic activity. And if it can be demonstrated to the director, we do have a clause in the protocol that basically speaks, if you want just to justify, another rigorous approach, it can be considered. But by default, it actually refers to naturally occurring substances that shouldn't be influenced by anything else.
Okay, next question. Are there plans to extend the Thompson Okanagan region to be extended down the valley, as it only extends south to Peachland at present?
Well, not at this time. Similar answer to the previous question. At some point in the future, we'll look to expanding or including new regions if we get the data to do it.
Exactly. You can't do it unless there's data out there to do it with.
Okay, our next question. Is there any mechanism to share the background and groundwater information collected by the Oil and Gas Commission for many of the sites in northern BC?
Oh, do you want to talk to that, Steve?
I think you should take it, Livenia.
Okay. That was an original idea, and it's a great idea, but I think we approached the OGC with seeing if they had any data available for us to use, and it was negative. They did not have anything that they collected that they could present to us. So at the time, it was decided that we better limit it to what we can do, right? You only have a certain amount of time to get this protocol out and data to manage. It could be something in the future if we could find a source to provide us with that data.
Next question. Limited data sets. Shouldn't it be the minimum used, not the maximum?
That's a good idea. I'm going to think about that. And yeah, I understand where you're coming from, because a minimum would be a more conservative approach. It's just that when you have two data sets and you actually do a 95th percentile calculation, let's say, it takes the maximum. If you did this in Excel, it actually just takes automatically the maximum. So we've done this that way for many years now, so I think we'll probably just stick to that. I don't know what else. Would you have anything to add to that, Steve?
No, that's ideally we'd like to see more data
Right.
than the minimum.
And exactly. We usually like to see more data. If ideally in a background concentration, the concentrations shouldn't be totally totally different, so in the end, it shouldn't matter in the end.
Okay, our next question. Some metals such as arsenic, cobalt, and iron or manganese may become elevated above groundwater standards due to change in redox caused by fill placement and or buried wood waste rather than a specific anthropogenic source. Should groundwater be considered as contaminated even if less than the regional boundary background?
I think every site is different. It depends on what the fill would be, what type of fill is added. If I know that sometimes, there's situations where they add an organic type of fill, and then that changes the redox conditions. But it's difficult in those situations to determine, if there was if that's considered an anthropogenic, a secondary contamination if it wasn't even first contaminated in the beginning. So I would suggest if you do have a situation like that, send in a a request for an inquiry request through our inquiry management system.
Yeah, we've had all kinds of fill quality on sites in BC. You know, some fill is just, you know, native material from a site that's been pushed around to grade it or whatever, and other fill quality has come from who knows where and is really suspect. So it's going to come down to site-specific conditions and the actual quality of the fill.
Okay, our next question. If we are seeking background determinations for two different hydrological units at the same site, do we have to submit two separate applications, or can it be submitted in one submission for the site?
Yeah, we get that. We've got quite a few sites like that. So it's all you need is one application describing both of the hydrogeologic units and establishing two background groundwater concentrations for each of those units.
Okay, and Heather is asking, will the IMAP layer for background sites replace the previous approvals Excel sheets?
Do we still have those approval Excel sheets up on our website? I think they're talking about the workbook.
The workbook.
I can
right.
take this. I can take this
okay.
question. Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. So the protocol approvals workbook is no longer on the website, and we won't continue to do that. And the IMAP, the new or updated IMAP layer for this version of the protocol is available on the website. I wouldn't say that the workbook and the IMAP layer are a one-for-one. So but the current status is no workbook on the website, and the IMAP layer is available.
Yeah, all those background determinations are on the IMAP layer, but there's also other sites on there as well. So you see there's more green dots than there are background determinations.
Okay, and Blair is referring back to his previous questions about the oil and gas commission. Due to naturally high arsenic and other metals in the north, the Oil and Gas Commission has accepted a lot of background groundwater requests and has a large potential trove of data that could be used to build a database for northern sites.
Well, that's great to know, Blair. If you can direct us to who we could talk to about that, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Okay, our next question regarding turnaround times. I understand that the turnaround is the same once your application reaches the top of the pile. We are experiencing significantly longer times to reach the top of the pile. Are there any plans to address the issue? To address this issue?
Hi, it's Danielle again. That's not an exactly accurate description of the process that the ministry has. We do have our Apply for Services webpage, and I think that we will be looking to have a more extensive presentation about applying for services across all of the services that are available through the contaminated sites regime. So I think we'll just leave it there for today. On that question, maybe we can go into the next question.
Okay, thank you. What geological map was used to draw the sub-regional boundary lines?
That would have been the surface geology map for the Lower Mainland region.
Okay.
Put out by the Geological Survey, I believe.
Okay, and our next question with regards to IMAP again, are new background concentrations going to be added to IMAP, or are the sites shown just intended to be those used to calculate the Table 1 numbers?
Can you repeat that question again? There's questions in there.
Yeah, are the new background concentrations going to be added to IMAP, or are the sites shown just intended to be those used to calculate the Table 1 numbers?
Well, at some point we will update them, but go ahead, Lavinia.
No, I thought maybe Steve, you might know better than I, but when you click on them, you can get concentrations. But is it just the concentration for the whole site, or was it you?
So
Well,
there's you get two sets of data from the IMAP website. Like you get the regional concentrations for each region, and if you click on one of the sites that we use to generate those regional values, you get individual site data for that region, for that site. You also, the database itself that you can access via the protocol 9, will give you actual site data of individual wells
Yeah.
as spreadsheets. So there's really 3 sets of data that we're presenting in this protocol. And as we mentioned earlier, we'll update them as we can in the future.
We don't have any certain plans, but definitely we are looking at any new available data and information, and we will update it, yeah, as potentially possible, but we don't have any certain timelines to communicate now.
Okay, and that's the last of our questions.
Okay, good timing.
Good timing.
So thank you, everybody, for being on board today. If you have any further questions, they can be sent directly to the ministry. There is I believe on the screen right now, you do have an email address they can be directed to. And on that, I will say thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks for
Bye-bye.
attending webinar today.